Flint Jacobson yanked the sliding door of his rusty delivery van open, sighing heavily as he grabbed the last package of the day. His back ached from hauling boxes, his hands were rough from long hours, and his mind was preoccupied with a bigger worry: rent was due in a week, and his daughter, Ellie, needed new shoes. He adjusted his grip on the sleek black package and checked the address: Presley Hawthorne, 778 Belrose Avenue. His brow furrowed. He knew Belrose Avenue. It was the kind of place where people had staff to pick up their deliveries, not a single dad in a beat-up van. Shaking off his thoughts, Flint strode up the stone path leading to the mansion's enormous door and rang the bell. A moment later, the door swung open, and a woman stood before him, stunning, poised, and completely out of his league. Presley Hawthorne had the kind of beauty that made men forget their own names. Dark brown hair framed her face, and her emerald green eyes studied him with mild curiosity. She wore a crisp white blouse tucked into tailored pants, her wrist adorned with a watch that probably cost more than his van. "Yes," her voice was smooth, effortless. Flint cleared his throat. "Package for Presley Hawthorne." "That's me," she said, reaching out. As she took the package, their fingers brushed, and for some reason, a spark zipped up Flint's arm. He ignored it. "Thanks," she said, stepping back, but before she could close the door, Flint hesitated. Sorry, but do you need to sign for it?" He knew she didn't. He just wasn't ready to walk away yet. Presley tilted her head, studying him for a beat before smiling slightly. "Nope, but I appreciate the thoroughness." He nodded, feeling ridiculous, and turned to leave. "Wait," she called after him. Flint turned back, surprised. "You look like you could use a drink," she said, leaning against the doorframe. He blinked. "What?" "A drink, or at least a break. Do you always look this exhausted, or is today special?" Flint let out a dry chuckle. "No, this is pretty standard." Presley glanced past him at his van, then back at him, her expression unreadable. "Come in." He should have said no. He had no business stepping into a house that probably had more bathrooms than his entire apartment complex. But something about her invitation about her made it impossible to refuse. So, against all logic, he stepped inside. Flint expected luxury, but this was something else. The entryway alone was bigger than his entire apartment. A grand chandelier hung overhead, casting a golden glow across the marble floors. Everything was curated to perfection: elegant, expensive, and completely out of his world. "This place is," he started, but Presley cut him off with a knowing smile. "Ridiculous." "I was going to say nice, but sure." She laughed, leading him toward a sleek kitchen that looked like it had never been used. She pulled out 2 glasses and poured something amber into them before sliding one across the counter to him. "So," she said, leaning against the counter, "what's your story, delivery guy?" Flint hesitated. People like her didn't want to hear about people like him. But the way she looked at him, genuinely curious, not condescending, made him answer honestly. "Single dad, trying to keep things together." Something flickered in her expression. "How old?" "Ellie, she's 6. Smartest kid in the world, way too good for me." Presley's smile softened. "I doubt that." Flint took a sip of his drink, letting the warmth settle in his chest. "And you, what's your story, mansion woman?" She laughed. "Mansion woman. Just calling it like I see it." She swirled her drink, her expression thoughtful. "I run a company, tech investments. Grew up with wealth, but I worked for what I have now." Flint raised a brow. "Worked for it? Pretty sure people born into money don't have to work." Her eyes flashed with something. Was that irritation? "You'd be surprised." He didn't press. It wasn't his place. They talked for a while, and to his shock, it wasn't awkward. Presley was sharp, funny, and despite her wealth, oddly down to earth. For a moment, Flint forgot who he was, forgot the distance between their worlds. But reality hit hard when he checked the time. Should go. Presley nodded, but there was something in her expression that made him pause. Like maybe she wasn't ready for him to leave either. Flint. Yeah. Don't be a stranger. His chest tightened at those words, because people like him and people like her, they didn't mix. But as he stepped outside, the warmth of her presence lingered. And for the first time in a long time, he wondered if maybe just maybe life had something more in store for him. Flint hadn't expected to see Presley again. Not really. People like her didn't cross paths with people like him more than once. Their worlds weren't made to overlap. But 2 days after their unexpected conversation, he found himself pulling up to the same mansion, another package in hand. He checked the address twice, wondering if fate was playing a joke on him. He took a breath and walked up the familiar stone path, ringing the doorbell. This time, when the door swung open, Presley's expression shifted from polite curiosity to something warmer. "Back so soon?" she asked, leaning against the frame. "Seems like you order a lot of packages," he said, holding it up. She took it with a small nod, then hesitated. And yet, none of them are as interesting as the guy delivering them. Flint blinked. He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "Are you flirting with your delivery guy?" he asked, half joking. Presley lifted a shoulder. Would it be a problem? It should have been. He should have laughed it off, handed over the package, and gone back to his van. But something about the way she was looking at him made his feet stay planted. Instead of answering, he folded his arms. "You always invite random men into your house." She tilted her head, considering. "No, just you." For a second, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, like something was shifting, though neither of them had the words for it yet. Then Presley stepped back. "Come in." Flint hesitated only a moment before following. This time, she led him somewhere different. A glass-walled room that overlooked a sprawling backyard, complete with a pool that shimmered under the afternoon sun. She gestured for him to sit while she poured 2 glasses of water. "You look at this view every day?" he asked, glancing at the perfectly manicured lawn. Presley set the glass in front of him. "I guess I do." "And?" She shrugged. "It's just a view." Flint shook his head. "Figures, people with everything never seem to notice what they have." Her gaze flickered to him. "You think I have everything." "Don't you?" She was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "Money makes things easier, but it doesn't make them better." Flint exhaled through his nose. Sounds like something only a rich person would say. Presley didn't get defensive. Instead, she held his gaze. "Tell me something, Flint. If you had money, real money, what's the first thing you'd do?" Without thinking, he answered. "I'd buy my daughter a house, somewhere safe, somewhere she could grow up without me worrying about the ceiling caving in." Something in Presley's expression softened. "That's a good answer." Flint ran a hand over his face. "Yes, well, doesn't matter. Dreams like that don't happen for people like me." Presley studied him for a long moment. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "What if I offered you a job?" He blinked. "What?" "A real job," she continued. "Something that pays enough to give Ellie that house." Flint stared at her, his pulse kicking up. "Why would you do that?" "Because I can." He shook his head. "People don't just offer strangers life-changing jobs." Presley's lips curved slightly. "I do." Flint leaned back, trying to process. This woman, this billionaire, was offering him something that sounded too good to be true. "What's the catch?" he asked. She tilted her head, considering. "You'd have to work for it." He let out a breath, rubbing his jaw. I'm not a charity case, Presley. Her expression turned serious. I didn't say you were. I'm offering you an opportunity, not a handout. Flint looked away, his thoughts racing. This wasn't how things worked. People like him didn't get lucky breaks. But as he glanced back at Presley, something in her expression made him pause. She wasn't pitying him, she was challenging him. And against all logic, he found himself saying, "Tell me more." Flint sat in Presley's sunlit office, hands clasped together as she typed something on her laptop. He still couldn't wrap his head around the situation. 1 minute, he was a delivery driver, barely scraping by. The next, he was sitting across from a woman who had the power to change his life with a single decision. She glanced up from her screen. "You look like you're waiting for me to tell you this was a joke." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I just don't get it. You don't even know me." Presley leaned back in her chair, watching him with an unreadable expression. "I know enough." He narrowed his eyes. "Like what?" "You're hardworking, responsible, you don't make excuses, and you put your daughter first." She folded her arms. "That's more than I can say for a lot of people in my world." Flint leaned forward. "And what exactly is this job?" She tapped her fingers against the desk. "Something different from what you're used to. I need someone I can trust to oversee a new project." He let out a short laugh. "What kind of project?" "A logistics expansion for one of my subsidiaries. It involves distribution, efficiency management, things you already have experience with, even if you don't realize it." Flint ran a hand through his hair. "Presley, I don't have a degree, I don't have connections, I don't belong in a place like this." She tilted her head. "Who told you that?" "It's just the way the world works." Her gaze held his. "Not my world." Something in her tone made his stomach tighten. She wasn't offering him a lifeline out of pity. She was offering him a chance to prove himself to her, to the world, maybe even to himself. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. "What if I fail?" Presley's lips curved slightly. "What if you don't?" Flint stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had spent years surviving, never daring to think about what could be. But now, sitting in front of this woman who saw something in him he hadn't seen in himself for a long time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could take the risk. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I'm in." A flicker of satisfaction crossed Presley's face. "Good." She slid a folder across the desk. "Your official offer. Look it over. If you're still interested tomorrow, we'll make this official." Flint hesitated before picking it up. He had never signed a contract for anything other than low-wage jobs. This was different. This was real. He met her gaze. "Why do I feel like my life just changed?" Presley smiled, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that unsettled him, not because it was intimidating, but because it was something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I hope." Flint stood, folder in hand, and walked out of her office. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same. Flint stepped into the towering glass building that housed one of Presley's many companies, adjusting the sleeves of his new button-down. It was his first day, and everything felt surreal: the polished floors, the quiet hum of efficiency, the weight of the opportunity he had been given. He had spent years in jobs that drained him without offering anything in return. But now, as he stood in the sleek office Presley had arranged for him, he realized he wasn't just another employee. She had placed real trust in him. The door opened, and Presley walked in, her presence commanding the space effortlessly. She had changed from the crisp blouses and tailored pants he had seen her in before, now wearing a sharp navy suit that made her look all the more untouchable. And yet, the way she smiled when she saw him softened that impression entirely. "You survived the first few hours," she said, setting a folder on his desk. "Barely," Flint admitted, exhaling. "Your people are intense." "They're efficient," she corrected, settling on the edge of his desk. They just need to see that you are too. He studied her, the easy confidence in her posture, the way she made everything seem effortless. And you really think can do this? Presley's expression turned serious. I wouldn't have offered if I didn't. His chest tightened. Why me? She tilted her head. Because I know what it's like to be underestimated. Flint wasn't sure what to say to that. He had assumed her life had always been one of privilege and ease, but something in her tone suggested otherwise. Before he could press for more, she straightened. Come on, I want to show you something. He followed her down the hall, past glass offices and employees who whispered when they thought he wasn't looking. She led him to an elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. When the doors opened, Flint was met with a stunning rooftop terrace overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, the sun casting golden light over the buildings. This is where I come when I need to breathe, Presley said, walking to the edge. Flint followed, taking in the view. Never pictured you as someone who needed a break. She gave a small laugh. I never let people see when I do. He leaned against the railing, watching her. You don't have to do that with me. Presley turned to him, something unreadable in her eyes. I know. The space between them felt charged, different from their previous interactions. This wasn't just about work. It wasn't about status. It was something deeper, something neither of them had spoken aloud yet. Flint swallowed. Presley, I. Before he could finish, she stepped closer, her voice low. You don't have to say it. And then, as if it had been inevitable, she reached up, her fingers brushing against his jaw before she closed the distance between them. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, as if testing the boundaries of something neither of them fully understood. But then Flint pulled her closer, his hand settling against the small of her back, and all hesitation disappeared. When they finally broke apart, Presley let out a breath, her forehead resting against his. This is complicated. Flint chuckled, running a hand through his hair. Yes, just a little. She pulled back, searching his face. Do you regret it? He shook his head without hesitation, not even a little. A slow smile spread across her face. Good. For the first time in years, Flint wasn't thinking about survival. He wasn't worrying about rent or bills or whether he would make it through the next month. For the first time, he was thinking about the future. And for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. Flint wasn't sure how he expected things to unfold after that rooftop kiss, but Presley wasn't the type to second-guess herself. The next morning, she strode into his office like nothing had changed, except for the way her gaze lingered on him just a little longer than before. He was still adjusting to this new life meetings, reports, responsibilities that stretched beyond anything he had ever handled. But every time doubt crept in, every time he questioned whether he belonged, Presley would catch his eye across the room and give him the smallest nod, a silent reminder that she had chosen him for a reason. One evening, as the last of the employees filtered out of the building, Presley appeared in his doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Walk with me, she said. Flint pushed back from his desk, following her into the empty corridors. The city lights flickered through the windows, casting long shadows as they stepped into the elevator. She pressed a button he had never noticed before, one that took them to a floor even higher than the rooftop. When the doors slid open, Flint was met with a private lounge, all floor-to-ceiling windows and sleek furniture. A bottle of scotch sat on a marble counter, 2 glasses waiting. You have a whole secret floor, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Presley walked to the windows, looking out at the city spread beneath them. It's not a secret, just private. Flint joined her, the silence between them settling into something comfortable. Why did you bring me here? He finally asked. She turned to face him, her expression softer than usual. "Because I wanted a moment with you, without the office, without the expectations." Flint studied her, the way she carried the weight of everything so effortlessly, yet he had come to realize it wasn't effortless at all. "You work too much," he said. Presley let out a quiet laugh. "And you don't." He shrugged. "I have a reason to work, Ellie." She hesitated, then looked down. "And you think I don't have a reason." Flint frowned. "I didn't say that." She exhaled, running a hand through her dark hair. "I built this company because I wanted control over my life, over my future. When you grow up surrounded by people who think they own you, you learn fast that the only way to be free is to be the one calling the shots." He hadn't expected that. "Who thought they owned you?" he asked. Presley's jaw tightened. "My father, his business partners, the world of people who looked at me and saw a pawn instead of a person." Flint nodded slowly. "And now you're the one in charge." She met his gaze. "Now, no one tells me who I'm supposed to be." Something in his chest tightened as he looked at her. She wasn't just a billionaire with a perfect life. There were battles beneath the surface, scars that weren't visible but were still felt. He reached for her hand, hesitating only a moment before lacing his fingers through hers. "You don't have to do it alone." For once, Presley didn't have a sharp reply. She simply squeezed his hand back. The city stretched beneath them, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that mattered was the quiet understanding between them. And for the first time, Flint realized that maybe this wasn't just about a job or an opportunity. Maybe it was about something far bigger, something neither of them had been expecting. Flint barely recognized the man staring back at him in the mirror. The crisp navy suit fit perfectly, tailored in a way that made him look like he belonged in this world, Presley's world. He adjusted his tie, still not used to the feel of expensive fabric against his skin. Tonight was a company gala, a high-profile event filled with industry leaders, investors, and people who had probably never worked a day of hard labor in their lives. Presley had insisted he attend, and while he had initially resisted, the way she had looked at him when she asked had made it impossible to refuse. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. When he opened it, Presley stood there, and for the first time since meeting her, Flint was at a complete loss for words. She wore a floor-length emerald gown, the deep color making her eyes look even more striking. The fabric hugged her frame in a way that was both elegant and effortless. A delicate diamond bracelet adorned her wrist, subtle but impossible to miss. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to remember how to speak. "You look." Presley arched a brow, amused by his rare speechlessness. "I'll take that as a compliment." Flint exhaled, shaking his head. "Yeah, definitely a compliment." She glanced him over, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. "Not bad yourself, Jacobson." He chuckled, loosening his tie slightly. "Still not sure I belong at something like this." Presley stepped closer, adjusting the knot of his tie with careful precision. "You belong wherever you decide to be." He held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. Then, before he could overthink it, he offered his arm. "Shall we?" A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she accepted, sliding her hand into the crook of his elbow. "Let's go show them what they're missing." The gala was exactly what Flint expected: grand, overwhelming, and filled with people who thrived on power and influence. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the massive ballroom, and waiters in pristine uniforms carried trays of champagne through the crowd. Presley moved effortlessly through it all, exchanging greetings and nods with people who clearly knew her name. Flint, on the other hand, felt like an imposter, but he kept his expression neutral, unwilling to let anyone see his discomfort. As they made their way through the room, an older man approached, his presence commanding attention. He wore a tailored suit that likely cost more than Flint's entire savings, and his sharp eyes flicked between Flint and Presley with veiled curiosity. "Presley," the man greeted, his voice smooth but edged with something Flint couldn't quite place. Presley's expression remained unreadable. "Father." Flint stiffened. So this was the man she had mentioned, the one who had tried to control her life. Her father's gaze settled on Flint, assessing, "And you must be the man I've been hearing about." Flint met his stare evenly. "Guess that depends on what you've been hearing." A slow, deliberate pause. Then the older man chuckled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Presley always did have a habit of making unexpected choices. Presley's fingers tightened slightly on Flint's arm, a subtle but clear signal that she wasn't interested in playing whatever game her father was trying to start. Flint is more than capable of handling himself. Her father studied them for a moment longer before offering a thin smile. "We'll see." With that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Flint exhaled, glancing at Presley. "Charming guy." Her lips pressed together. "He thinks power is the only thing that matters, that people are only worth what they can offer." Flint tilted his head. "And you?" She looked at him, her expression softer now. "I think some things are worth more than power." Something in his chest tightened, but before he could say anything, a waiter approached with 2 glasses of champagne. Presley took one, handing the other to Flint. "To unexpected choices," she murmured, raising her glass. Flint clinked his against hers, a slow smile forming. "To proving people wrong." Hours later, after the gala had ended and the last of the guests had departed, Flint and Presley found themselves alone on the balcony of her penthouse, the city stretching endlessly below them. She leaned against the railing, the night breeze ruffling the loose strands of her hair. Flint stood beside her, hands in his pockets, the weight of everything settling in. "This life," he said after a while, "it's nothing like mine." Presley turned to him. "I never wanted you to change who you are." He met her gaze. "And what if don't fit into your world?" She stepped closer, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "Then I'll build a new one with you." Flint exhaled, reaching up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the edge of her cheekbone. "You're impossible, you know that." Presley smiled, leaning into his touch. "So are you." And then, just like on the rooftop, he kissed her. But this time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just the undeniable truth of what had been building between them from the beginning. A year later, Flint stood on another rooftop, this time overlooking a quiet villa perched on a hillside, far away from the noise of the city. Presley stood beside him, barefoot, her hair tousled by the wind. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. She turned to him, her expression shifting as she saw it. "Flint." He smiled, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "You once told me that power wasn't the most important thing, that people mattered more." Presley swallowed hard, her usually composed expression breaking into something raw and real. "I don't have an empire," he continued. "I don't have a legacy like yours, but what I do have is a heart that belongs to you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." For the first time, Presley Hawthorne looked at a man not as a challenge to win or as an obstacle to overcome, but as the one thing she had never let herself believe in home. She nodded, unable to form words, and Flint slipped the ring onto her finger. As he pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her lips, he knew this was it. Not just an unexpected choice. Not just a chance at something more. This was their forever.